Yellow. So we are here with Xavier. We're going to go through the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and comment with thoughts. Uh, what the background, in terms of theology is, and it's what we're saying by it. All right. So the beginning starts with chapter 2. No, it doesn't. Chapter 4. And it's missing the first 3 lines. So the text that we have begins, "Will matter then be destroyed or not?" And I'll read through. The chapters are pretty small, so I'll just read the first chapter here, and then we'll comment on it. And then
Okay.
also, if anybody is watching this, feel free to post a comment in there, and we'll put your comment up. All right, so I'll just start. Will matter then be destroyed or not? The Savior said, "All nature, all formations, all creatures exist in and with one another, and they will be resolved again into their own roots. For the nature of matter is resolved into the roots of its own nature alone. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Peter said to him, "Since you have explained everything to us, tell us this also. What is the sin of the world?" The Savior said, "There is no sin, but it is you who make sin when you do the things that are like the nature of adultery, which is called sin. That is why the good came into your midst, to the essence of every nature, in order to restore it to its root." Then he continued and said, "That is why you become sick and die, for you are deprived of the one who can heal you. He who has a mind to understand, let him understand. Matter gave birth to a passion that has no equal, which proceeded from something contrary to nature. Then there arises disturbance in its whole body. That is why I said to you, be of good courage, and if you are discouraged, be encouraged in the presence of the different forms of nature. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." When the Blessed One had said this, he greeted them all, saying, "Peace be with you. Receive my peace unto yourselves. Beware that no one leads you astray, saying, 'Lo, here,' or 'Lo, there.' For the Son of Man is within you. Follow him. Those who seek him will find him. Go then and preach the gospel of the kingdom. Do not lay down any rules beyond what I appointed to you. And do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it." When he said this, he departed. And that is chapter 4. So my thoughts on it, we seem to be talking about the monad. Let's see, going back to its roots, or what does it say? It'll be resolved into itself. I think that's returning to the monad. Or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. From the beginning, it has, and it makes me wonder what was before this, because it says, "Will matter then be destroyed or not?" And
Gotcha.
it uses the word tholios, which isn't exactly hylic, like it isn't the same Greek word for matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more complex term, which it could mean several things. Mainly, it mainly refers to something that which could be matter, but it could
Mhm.
also refer to like mud on a more mundane level. When
Yeah.
we're talking something like uh, symbolism of the divine feminine, it specifically represents menstrual blood. However, the other way that it's interpreted on like a metaphorical view of it is it means cloudiness, but it could be talking about like the cloudiness of the mind. uh, in Buddhism there's kind of something like that, where our minds are basically clouded by Maya. They're clouded in a way to where we don't see things clearly. And I think like with
Mhm.
Gnosticism, it's sort of the same way, is that, to obtain gnosis, we have to be able to, in a sense, clear our minds, much like
Yeah.
they sort of do in Buddhism. They meditate and they clear out a lot of these sort of thoughts, and down to where they're sort of like what would be like single pointedness. They
Mhm.
in yoga, you burn off a lot of what would be like past trauma, past emotions, things that have one's mind stuck in the past, to where you could get your mind closer to being in the present moment. So, I mean, it could maybe be talking about something like that. They could just be
Mhm.
using the term as just like a generalized term for matter, like actual physical matter. But they could also be saying something along the lines of, will matter ultimately, or will this sort of cloudiness ultimately be destroyed, and then one will obtain like the purest of gnosis. Like in Sethianism, one goes through the five seals, and through each seal, I mean, you receive gnosis even if it's clouded, but as you go through each seal, you begin to realize gnosis with more clarity. At least that's
Mhm.
supposedly the theory behind that. That's something I actually myself have to work on. Uh, it's something that I still need to approach. Where
Yeah.
like I've approached like interaction with the eons, but that's something where, at least like with the four baptismal rites of Sethianism, it's something that I still have to myself personally need to work on. I believe like once someone, and in each, what I'm trying to say, each seal has like a guardian,
Mhm.
which is the four luminaries. But I believe as you progress through those, you become more enlightened. It's almost like someone progressing through the stages of Buddhism. They get closer to nirvana, and I feel like that's kind of what's going on in regard to Gnosticism. You get
Yeah.
more and more clear understanding of the divine as one progresses through these practices.
Yeah. I wonder, kind of like I said, if we're talking about it'll be resolved again into their own roots, is like a return to nirvana, right?
Yeah,
And then,
return to nirvana, or like some sort of a pure state, or like you were saying
mhm,
before, closer to the monad.
yeah. Or, I mean, can things de emanate from the monad? I don't know if that's a thing in Gnosticism, like just rejoin the monad.
What do you mean by that, de-emanate? You mean
Like,
because I feel
un,
like the go ahead.
uh, like, like just like it emanated, it can reverse that process.
I feel like it is a polarity of both, because as you descend, you become more material, and it kind of works that way in Buddhism as well. Like
Yeah.
as one has more karma attached to them, they eventually emerge through nature. Their consciousness emerges through nature and is basically entangled with matter.
Yeah.
So as you drop your body, and if you don't re-emerge through matter and you go to the higher planes of existence, you become less attached to worldly desires, worldly things, because you're no longer physical matter as well.
Yeah.
It becomes less and less sensation, less and less karma in the higher realms. And eventually they
Yeah.
get to a point where they're no longer producing karma. I think with this as well, they mention here, it says that in the Gospel of Mary,
Hmm.
that sin is the nature of adultery, which is called
Yeah.
sin. It's almost suggesting that, well, he says there is no sin. So my
Mhm.
thought on that is it's similar to how in the objective world there is no sin. You create sin yourself. So in this sense, and I kind of view it this way in Gnosticism, sin in Gnosticism is parallel to karma in Buddhism, meaning it's based off cause and effect. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
there isn't free will. I guess you could still view it that way as well, but it's like you're responsible for your own creation of sin. There's no sin naturally. We develop sin. And I think when they're saying like adultery, how do you feel about that when they say it's like adultery?
Yeah.
What comes to mind for you? How do
I'm
you view it?
reminded there's a prohibition on in the Old Testament drinking water from a different cistern where that seems to be like a metaphor for adultery. Um, that comes to mind. And like, what is the nature of adultery? I'm wondering if there's like a double meaning here. So, like, we talk about like the bridal chamber, right? You're where you're kind of being wed to your ideal self. Maybe that's a way of looking at it. And like being unfaithful to your ideal self, right? And so in the thought, it's like you're trying to ascend, but you're not. You're still being lowly, right? Do you What do you think about that
That's
as
a
far as
good
interpretation?
That's a great analogy, and I didn't think about it that way until you
Yeah.
mentioned that. But it could. I mean, a lot of these texts. I mean, they're open ended, so I mean, they could mean more than one thing, obviously, and they're meant to be that way to where we gain new understandings, new realizations
Mhm.
every time that we dig into the Gospels or dig into some of these texts. I
Yeah.
feel that here, it's like, what do we do? What do people do when they commit adultery? A lot of times it is a selfish act because they're only concerned about their own pleasure. And the nature of adultery, maybe that's something like desire, pleasure, or
Mhm.
seeking some kind of chasing after some sort of sensation, where they're saying that sin itself is like this sort of selfish act, where in a way sin being like karma, it
Mhm.
builds and it sticks to us like a residue until someone atones
Yeah.
or in some
Now,
way gets it off of them.
yeah. So where it says the Savior said there is no sin. So there is no sin. That reminds me of kind of the latter part of the chapter where don't make for yourself any, don't hold yourself to the law. Do not lay down any rules beyond what I appointed to you, and do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it. So the lawgiver is the demiurge, and we're constrained by the law by the demiurge. And so there is no sin as such, right? There's no like rules to follow, but there's bad things, like things that are like the nature of adultery. So I think that this is right. It doesn't say things like, it doesn't say when you, let's say, commit adultery, right? When you
Mhm.
do things that are like the nature of adultery. So it's not saying it's adultery. It's it's things that are like the nature of adultery, which kind of confirms me into thinking that we're not talking about adultery. We mean it in like a different sense, not being true to um, true to yourself, or I guess being inauthentic, or being like lies, right?
Yeah, yeah. There was something else I looked at earlier. I don't have the text pulled up, but there's something where they look into this text a little bit, and they mention that adultery being a metaphor for sort of like a, I guess when people do commit adultery, it's almost like they lack concern for the other person. So they were talking about it being sort of a acts that are in a way selfless to some extent, or
Mm-hmm.
where there's no, where we go about things uh, where there's no like solid intention, or in a sense ill-willed, or like how would you put it, lackadaisically, where there's no like uh, almost purpose behind it or good intention, or we kind of, or people sometimes go about things in, I don't want to, I think it's more than just a lazy manner, but in a way to where they live a sort of desolate life, if that makes sense, where they just kind of
Mm-hmm. Kind
I'm
of do
trying to
whatever.
kind of do whatever. Yeah, I was trying to think of a way to sort of express that. But yeah, where it's like
Yeah.
they act in a way where they don't have significance or meaning behind it, or like you were saying, like a true purpose behind it, where it's more of like, in a sense, unguided.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, intentional sin is bad, but then you're also looking here at being something being like habitual sin, where there's a lack of concern of as to what we do. Sometimes people just kind of go through life without really even thinking about it. They're
Yeah.
sort of on automatic.
Yeah. Where, I mean, when I think of people that have committed adultery, that's kind of not even metaphorical. That's how they kind of live, where it just happens to you, right? Even though you're doing it, right? I'm also thinking of the demiurge created, and not knowing that he's part of like a wider pleroma, and thinking he's doing his own thing and he can just kind of do whatever he wants because he's the boss, right?
Yeah,
And I like he makes the laws so he can just do whatever. Where that's kind of the mindset I think that you're talking about.
yeah, that makes sense. Like, where as the lawmaker, he creates his own arbitraries. He makes his own
Yeah,
decisions without taking into consideration the feelings of other people or the rational world. It's built off instinct,
yeah,
uh, reactionary actions. I guess you could say he's reactionary, irrationality. It's almost the opposite of what the pleroma would be.
yeah. And we had mentioned like what might be going on in chapter 3, right? So there's another translation that I read. It's like, so then will matter be destroyed or not? So like it's kind of like piggybacking off of what was said previously, And I would think that it has to be something along like Platonist thought that matter is evil and evil will pass away, or something along those lines. Like matter is chaos, matter is not the light, and anything that's not the light will pass away. And I think there was something in the Apocryphon of John where they talk about how substance came into being, and it's like it's a form of chaos and disorder. I wonder if that's not what brings up that question.
It sounds like it would be.
Yeah. So, like, I wonder, because the Gnostics kind of liked creation myths, right? We see a lot of that in the Apocryphon of John. I mean, they don't get into it straight away, but we see the parallels with Genesis, where the demiurge thinks he's the only one, and previous to that, they have the creations of the water and the deep, right? And the demiurge said, let there be light, or something along those lines, right? And then we see like the canonical Gospel of John, where they kind of have a mini creation myth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. So I'd wonder if, well, and this is assuming if this is a Gnostic text, which I kind of take it to be, that there is likely a creation myth at the beginning.
Oh, that precedes this. You're
Yeah,
saying that something before this was probably something Platonic or some sort of
like
something that refers to like either a creation myth, or maybe it was something like the trimorphic proto-Noah, where it just kind of explains cosmology in a way, or explains like it explains sort of like that Gnostic mechanism, thought processes.
Yeah, you wonder. Well, so here's the thing: they're big into chiasma, and so I would want to look at the very end of it, and that could tell us a little bit.
Yeah,
what's
that's
going
a
on
good
at the
point.
beginning. So at the very last one of chapter 9, which is the end, that is why he loved her more than us. Rather, let us be ashamed and put on perfect man, and separate as he commanded us, and preach the gospel, not laying down any other rule or other law beyond what the Savior said. Oh, this is my cat moving my lap. I think there's the tail. Let's see. Levi answered and said to Peter, Peter, you have always been hot-tempered. I don't know. What is this trying to... I mean, we're going forth to proclaim and preach. Maybe something like, come here, I'll tell you a story, right? Or listen to my words. Look inside yourself, right? As a parallel to go out and preach the gospel. I don't know. I bet it's something along those lines to kind of bookend it. All right, and then what other points do we have here? Sickness came into the world because of sin, or not sin exactly what, matter gave birth to a passion that has no equal, which proceeds from something contrary to nature. Then there arises a disturbance in its whole body. So it's kind of along the lines of, it sounds Pauline, right? Sounds like it's where this is from an epistle where sin came into the world and that's where sickness came from.
Sure.
But they're saying that there isn't sin. It's just that what? Okay, nature will be resolved into the roots of its nature. Or for the nature of matter is resolved into the roots of its own nature alone. I bet it'll be, I don't know, what is that trying to say? That the eons will consume matter that's related to that eon.
It sounds more, I mean, it would be archonic than it would be aeonic because the archons are more associated with matter.
Okay. So, yeah, how do you take this?
When I read it, I mean, again, I'm always relating something to Buddhism, but
Mhm.
it almost seems like matter itself that there's like a craving, a carnal desire for that which is material and that
Mhm.
which causes some sort of sensation or pleasure. So I kind of feel that with that, we're deeply attached to the material world. Our mind is constantly on what is going on here, and often we are our own minds are in a way they they run on I guess you would say automatic. So we're not necessarily solely focused on what is divine, but we're more focused on like what's happening on Earth. You see what I mean? Do you kind of get what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, like have a mind rather than not, or what would we say? Whereas, like, it's divine, like, mind is divine, but let's say, uh, like a reptilian mind is not as divine, and it's just kind of it's lower level.
Yeah, we kind of get caught up in the rat race and just instinctive behavior, especially once we're conditioned by our parents and so forth. Like, I mean, once the way we kind of look at it is once we're down here long enough, we forget about
Hmm.
spirituality, we forget about the divine, and we're only focused on our 9 to 5 jobs
Yeah,
as opposed to there being something beyond matter. Even our own consciousness is our consciousness. Eventually, if we forget about it, it just becomes part of our brain
yeah,
rather than consciousness being its own unique quality.
yeah. That reminds me of a Gnostic story. I don't remember where it is, but there was a prince that was imprisoned in a well, I guess a prison, right, in a dungeon, and he was like with a whole bunch of other prisoners, and the captors gave them like all kinds of things that would debase them, all kinds of pleasures, and they could just do whatever they wanted to. And the prince remembered he was a prince, and he didn't do any of that. Right? He just waited for the time where he would get out. And they asked him, "Why didn't you like ever? Why weren't you ever tempted to do it when everybody else there was?" And then he says, none of them were princes like I am." right? So
Interesting.
he remembered it, and he's just like, this is my nature, this is who I am. And he just, yeah, well, they're not princes, so
Interesting. That kind of reminds me of Jesus being tempted in the desert,
mm-hmm.
because he goes through three different temptations. He's got the first temptation, he's fasting, right? So then Satan offers him food,
Mm-hmm.
which he basically compiles it out of rocks. So in a sense, it's almost like an illusion to begin with, because it's not real food. But he's able to overcome that,
Mm-hmm.
his own physical desires, right?
Yeah.
The body needs food, the body needs water. Maybe he was hallucinating in the desert. He was able to overcome what he physically needed. Then Satan offers him the kingdom, the entire world. You could rule this planet, you could rule
Mm-hmm.
over everyone. I'll give up the earth, and you could take my place, and rule over mankind, rule over humanity. And he turns it down again, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
turning down basically being the sovereign of the planet, and all. It's almost like he offered him the demiurge's spot, you rule
Yeah,
over all of the
exactly.
cosmos, not just Earth, but like you have it all, and he turns it down. And then in the third temptation, he tries to get basically Jesus to just abandon everything, commit suicide, jump off a cliff, and just abandon life and get out of here, and you won't have to take on Satan anymore. You'll be gone, and you can go back to heaven. But he decides to endure till
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah. And that strikes me as very Gnostic. I mean,
I,
the most striking thing is, how is Satan offering Jesus the world? Does he run the world? He's the demiurge, right? Like, I thought it wasn't it Hashem that ran the world, right? And one other thing where that is, that only in Mark where we see that? Or does it appear in Luke?
I think we just see it there.
Yeah. And it's at the very beginning, and it just seems out of place, where it's just kind of stuck in there. And I I think that's like a insertion maybe, or if there's like where we talk about like secret mark, that there's a different version that Clement mentions that has different insertions that kind of resolve things that just kind of seem like weird insertions, like the naked youth that is just running for no reason, right? Where, like, where did he come from? What's going on, right? Where I wonder if there wasn't originally something more to it, or it was just added later to a proto mark.
I wonder. It makes me wonder what the Peshitta says now. Now that you bring that up, if there's maybe some difference in the grammar, in the way that it's expressed, or if it was there to begin with. Another point is that its arrangement, it may have been in a different part of Mark in the Peshitta, as opposed to it being closer to the beginning, where in regard to like a timeline, it might make more sense that it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
Either way, with something like Secret Mark, and that's a good point that you bring it up. There's something about the Carpocratians, they were a Gnostic sect, and there was also, like, it's believed that they splintered off or were influenced by a previous group that claimed to have direct lineage from Mary Magdalene. So with that being said, and that was one of the texts that they claimed to have, was an oral tradition of Secret Mark.
Hmm.
Well, it doesn't say it was an oral tradition, but I mean that's the theory is that it could have been. But
Hmm.
supposedly they had secret mark, which is mentioned in some of some commentaries.
Hmm.
So I mean, if there was, the thought behind that is it was an esoteric level,
Yeah.
meaning that one received mark and then later they got secret mark like you mentioned, and it cleared it all up for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I remember reading about that. You're familiar with the Marsaba letter?
Oh yeah, like I the one that emerges in the 1800s. Is that what you mean? And like the later secret
There's
mark?
what's his name? Morton Smith. He wasn't believed for the longest time. There's a letter from Clement where Clement is denouncing the what are they carpocratians? What are they called? Is
Yeah,
that the right term?
yeah.
And he says that they're a bunch of libertines that have uh, added things to Secret Mark. And just, I mean, interestingly, before that, um, he says it's okay to lie about the existence of Secret Mark. You don't need to say all true things to all people. You can lie even under oath, which is kind of interesting. And then, like, well, then how do we believe anything you say about Secret Mark if you say it's okay to lie about it, right? And then he says the Carpocratians were a bunch of libertines, and they added like salacious libertine stuff to it. Like Secret Mark doesn't mention anything about naked man with naked man. Um, says Clement, but then he quotes a few passages that exist in Secret Mark, but not in canonical Mark.
Hmm.
But now, if we can verify that the Carpocratians had a version of Secret Mark that makes that letter that Morton Smith found, it kind of makes it look a little bit more authentic, right? So it's it'd be hard to
Yeah,
doubt its authenticity.
I mean, people believe that. I mean, like I said, there's people believe maybe it was a hoax or fraud, the letter, and then you know that some of those materials ended up missing, right?
Yeah.
They fell into the hands of the Greek Orthodox Church, and then boom. But they had made photocopies
Mhm.
of what they had written down, which they claimed to have been secret mark.
Oh, I didn't know that. I just thought it was the letter of Clement that referred to Secret Mark.
There's some sort of there's some sort of addition that supposedly stems from, and many archaeologists believe it's a hoax, but there was something that emerged in the 1800s that's supposedly a modern uh, rendition of Secret Mark. They don't know if it's the original Secret Mark. Here's my thought: is there's probably more than one version that floated around. Carpocratians had well, when they mention it, it seems like there may have been three.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. There's Secret Mark, Mark, and what redacted Mark? Uh, I'll look it up. Um,
I
yeah,
guess I was saying as far as
I remember a reference to three marks. Um, let's see if I can find that
I think with oral
quickly.
traditions in the Middle East in general, there's going to be variations. So not everything's going to be exactly the same. So there's definitely going to be some sort of variant. I wouldn't be surprised if there
Mhm.
were many different versions of it that floated around. They had circulated in those times. As far as something that
Mhm.
survived, it seems that if something did survive, it might not be labeled.
Yeah. Yeah, which like a lot of them aren't. That people just read them and they're
Hmm.
like, "Holy smokes!" Like, what are they talking about? But I mean, some people like people later said that they they read the same thing. They came into contact with the Marsaba letter, but it didn't, I guess, blow their mind. Like, there's another version of Mark out there, a longer version. Um, so yeah, I guess you just have to go through it, read it yourself to find out that yeah, this is actually something big. All right, so
Have you've heard
yeah,
of the book of Jew or the book of you?
just the title, I
EAO.
think. Yeah, I've.
Well, there's a collection of manuscripts that it derives from, and
Mhm.
one of them is unlabeled. And I remember years back when I was speaking with somebody from the Ishmaelis, they had mentioned to me that in those texts they believed that one of them was the gospel of perfection, which is supposedly a lost Gnostic gospel, but it's an unlabeled manuscript. And they pointed out a few things in the wording and as to why they believed it was the gospel of
Mhm.
perfection. But like I said, there could be other gospels that we believe are lost. They're just
Mhm.
not labeled. They're just manuscripts that are kind of compiled with something else that's floating around. That's
Yeah,
already in circulation. They just happen to not have a labeling.
yeah. I think there's epistle to the Laodiceans. I think they say that that is actually identical to Colossians,
Yeah, Marcion
or
said
or
that.
it's Colossians, right? Where it's identical, or was it Galatians? Oh, so Marcion said it's identical to Colossians.
Uh, or did he say Corinthians? You know, now you got me wondering. Hold on here.
Um,
I know that
or Ephesians, Philemon. So basically, we have no idea. Um,
I know Marcion mentions that it is Ephesians. But in the basically what's recently occurred over the past few decades is that
yep.
the church of the Marcionite church, they extracted from the quotes, from the paraphrases and the quotations of these scriptures, which are mentioned by like Tertullian and other critics of Marcion in their polemics about him. They actually quote Marcion, so they reconstructed this specific epistle, and they have it available through the Marcion church, through the Marcionites. So like the modern Marcionites, the Church of Marcion, they you can find it online. It's been republished in their scriptures. They have a set of scriptures, and they have the epistle available now.
The epistle to the Laodiceans.
Yeah,
How would they get that if?
they extracted it from the words that, because they were quoted by other
Oh,
people saying Marcion
got
said
it.
this about this letter, Marcion said that, so they reconstructed it through Marcion's critics, through what they claimed it was, or through them quoting it. They compiled it from like basically like them, like I said, re-quoting Marcion.
Yeah, where yeah, some people say that we can reconstruct the Gospel of Marcion, through the critics.
Yeah, and they've done that mostly only through Greek and Syriac texts. And I remember I was telling you that some of the Turkish and Arabic translations haven't made it to English yet.
Yeah.
There's one that I saw that did from those references. Although now I can't find it online, and I've been looking for it for a few months. I should have downloaded it, and basically it's a little different because it doesn't mention Jesus by name. It just refers to him as the Lord, which is why
Mhm.
it's called the Gospel of the Lord. They just throughout the text they just
Oh,
refer to him
really?
as the fisherman or the Lord. They don't actually say Isa or
Yeah.
Yeshua or anything like that. They don't actually mention him by name, which
Yeah, I
gives
think
it sort of appearance that maybe it was a title or an archetype, or how like there's the Good Shepherd archetype, the
yeah.
ram bearer, the sheep bearer, which would fall in line with something like Mithras or Osiris, uh, Hermes. They were all even Abraham. They were all considered to be like good shepherds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Orpheus primarily through some of the Greek traditions, which Gnosticism is heavily influenced by Orpheism.
Yeah. How so?
There is, um, how would I describe that? How so? There are some references that suggest some of the early Gnostics also part of their canon would have been the Orphic hymns. Some of like there was a transition period
Mhm.
from when they were still pagan, uh, Greco-Roman pagans, as they converted into Christianity. There was a transition period where they were still partly pagan, partly Christian. It would have been
Mhm.
before the fifth and sixth centuries. Um, it would have been sometime around like the first, second centuries, even before, and then as Valentinianism still was beginning to emerge, many of the early proselytes, many of the early converts to Christianity, some of them came from Greco-Roman paganism. They wouldn't have necessarily abandoned their roots from the beginning. They would have found what was similar in Christianity and adopted that to what they already believed. But eventually, after centuries and centuries passed, they became more Christian and less pagan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only a hypothesis, and there is some
Mhm.
historical writings on it where where they may have been influenced by Orphic hymns. I mean, like I say, it's still a hypothesis, but there's some
Yeah.
scholars that believe that.
Yeah, I've heard that idea where Gnosticism likely predates Christianity, which I mean, I guess there's hardly any reason to really know if that's the case, but really the Gnostics used Christianity basically just as a way to tell their story in terms of Christian symbolism.
Yeah,
Though I don't think there's any real, like, we don't have Gnosticism as such until Christianity, where you wonder if it's not Christianity didn't originate with Gnosticism.
I
Um,
feel like they emerged at the same time. I mean, my thought on it is that, and I had mentioned this before, that they used the greatest tools they had at the time, which was Greco-Roman myth making, myth creation, as well
mhm.
as Greek philosophy, to explain a religious movement that stemmed out of the Middle East, Palestine and Israel. Meaning that as Greeks, that's how they would explain what it was, is that they use those
Mhm.
philosophical tools. So I feel like the first Gnostics, they were very much a part of Greek mythology to some extent, but they also were a part of Greek philosophy, and they use those tools to describe what they believe was occurring. It'd be like if someone tried to use Buddhism or something to explain another religion or someone trying to
Mhm.
use science to explain something, where they would use what tools they had available to them.
Yeah. Or you think if Mithraism is to Hinduism, right, where there's Mithras, but he's a totally different guy than in Hinduism, there's Mithras, or is that, are we talking like Persian, like polyistic thought? But, or, so there's an ancient religion, right, that Mithraism is kind of trying to say that they're based on, and this is the old religion that they're retelling, right? Mithras was a pre-existing god, right? Mithras. I want to say where is he from? He's the Iranian sun god, and so the parallel would be Christianity and Judaism, right? Where Christianity is saying, well, yeah, okay, there's Judaism, but here's what's really going on, right?
Yeah, it's like a religion that comes afterwards that is explaining a religion prior to it,
Yeah.
or like within, or maybe they merge at the same time period, or in some cases they claim that they may have been before it. It depends on what religion it is, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, even with Buddhism, they're kind of explaining Hindu concepts, but through a Buddhist lens. Like there's Brahma
Mhm.
in Buddhism, but the thing with that is that Brahma is not necessarily viewed as sort of a god. Or, but even
Yeah.
in Hinduism, Brahma is not always necessarily viewed as a god, but like a type of consciousness,
Yeah.
like the completed self or something like that. But whereas in Buddhism, it's they kind of view it as sort of like a false identity of the self, that there's realms or thought uh, levels of consciousness beyond the Brahmic realm, even though they consider it pretty high up. It's almost like one still having their ego attachments or some sort of identity attachment, and
Yeah.
the Atman still attached to them. And with Buddhism, they kind of strip it down further, that there's even more that could be fathomed.
Yeah. It is interesting how I remember reading that Brahma worldwide has around 1,000 devotees. So he's essentially like neither here nor there when it comes to Hinduism, or I guess the world generally, right? That I kind of see it as like, I mean, almost like in Gnostic thought, where he's not evil, he just forgets, right? So he created his daughters, he forgot that they're his daughters. He created a whole bunch of stuff, totally doesn't even remember doing it, and that's kind of where evil comes from, right? Is because he didn't create the world that well, and it's kind of a metaphor for, so he's the god of creation, and I think they don't have creation ex nihilo in Hinduism, and maybe that's just a metaphor to explain it, where there really isn't creation. You're either destroying or preserving, right? There's always something previous, right? um,
Definitely, Buddhism works that way as well. There's not necessarily there's always like there's dependent origination. There's always something that depends on something else for it to exist.
yeah.
Jainism is like that as well. There's no beginning or no end. There's no creation. The, the universe has always existed. The different planes of existence, different lokas have always existed, and there is no end. So there's not necessarily a creation. It's more of like changes of condition. I mean, even with like the Big
Mhm.
Bang, it's the same way. With science, there's at least some science, like some believe there's a beginning, but some explain it as there's the universe has always existed. It's just that the conditions of the universe have changed
Yeah.
to pave way for life, or establish boundaries or conditions in which life could exist.
Yeah.
But we see it a lot of times, even with science. I feel many times, or at least from materialists, they only see it as from the lens of Earth, as opposed to maybe thinking broader on the scale of like there being other worlds or other planets where there could be life. We just haven't reached it yet, or something along the lines of like parallel dimensions, quantum dimensions, life
Yeah.
being elsewhere other than here.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember a discussion where we were talking about, let's say there's demonstrated to be life on other worlds. What would be the Christian reaction if, because Christ came to redeem the world, right? And so does he redeem other alien or like alien planets, right? And I was thinking, well, maybe they don't really have sin like we do, right? Or maybe they have their own plan to, right, of salvation with them, right? I don't know if that would necessarily be the end of Christianity, like some people say.
Oh, yeah, what's kind of funny is that, I mean, with Gnosticism, it'd be perfectly fine because Gnosticism is meant to evolve. So so it would just be, we have a facet of what we believe the spiritual world to be, and they may have a different religion or something, but in a sense, they very much would be part of the material world anyhow, the material plane, material universe. In Buddhism, the way they would look at it is they came from one of the many thousands and millions of planets and worlds out there that they already sort of believed in.
Yeah.
So
No,
it's
yeah,
for
that makes
them,
sense.
aliens already exist,
Yeah.
as well as other dimensions where there would be other planets as well, other suns, other solar systems, what they describe as world systems. Well, there's a debate as to what a world system is in Buddhism, but I mean, for the most part, I would say on the most fundamental level, we're just kind of talking different galaxies, different planets, and so forth. But like an entire world system is like everything within the dimension
Yeah.
and series of dimensions, meaning that there's other entire systems that would also have similar planes of existence, other central realms, other like there's mere copies of this same cosmology over and over and over again,
Hmm.
like different sort of mirrors of the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get back to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And let's see. So we already touched on this. Matter gave birth to a passion that has no equal, which proceeded from something contrary to nature. Then there arises a disturbance in its whole body. So I kind of see proceeded from something contrary to nature. I kind of think of the demiurge, right? And maybe it's the effects of the demiurge are causing disturbance in its whole body, meaning either the individual body or
I
the entire world.
Well, I feel like maybe they're saying passion itself proceeded from something contrary to nature.
Hmm.
That it's like a spiritual quality in a way, but spiritual quality as it being like a desire or urge. That matter or attachment to this universe causes us to sort of long for that which we desire to pleasure ourselves with.
Yeah. So I read that which proceeded from something contrary to nature. So there is something contrary to nature, and then there's matter giving birth to a passion that has no equal.
As
Right?
a separate statement, you're saying?
No, I mean, so first came something contrary to nature, right? So it says matter gave birth to a passion that has no equal, which proceeded from something contrary to nature. So first there was something contrary to nature, and then from from that comes matter, which gives birth to something that has no, yeah, which, so there was something contrary to nature that resulted in matter, that resulted in passion. Right? So the thing contrary to nature, the demiurge. Demiurge results in matter. That results in passion.
Which then results in the disturbance of the whole body.
Yes.
Which then we start to have physical issues
Hmm.
because because of this because of the demiurge, basically.
Yeah. That's how I take it. Or what would we talk? What else could something contrary to nature mean? Like the malformed demiurge.
I mean, what is contrary to nature to some degree, I feel like is almost like non-existence or death. Because when I think of nature, I think of
Yeah.
that which exists in the material.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could be kind of Pauline. So, something contrary to nature, maybe they're just not trying to say sin, right? So, sin came into the world that gave birth to matter. I don't know. That would be a little bit off. But then, yeah, maybe that idea doesn't
Well,
work.
sin is contrary to nature because it doesn't
Well,
exist within the nature.
yeah, I
We,
mean,
we would have to create it. Go ahead.
sin doesn't give rise to matter, which gives birth to passion, right? So I'm thinking, what else could the thing contrary to nature be besides the demiurge? Maybe that's what the writer intended. Then arises disturbance in his whole body. And yeah, maybe by the whole body, that's like a metaphor for the earth or for existence. That's why everything is
Yeah,
messed up.
yeah, something like planetary ignorance, confusion.
Hmm. Yep. And
I
then
mean, when
we
I
had,
think the
oh
whole
yeah.
body, I was gonna say when I think the whole body too, in the hypostasis of the archons, they talk about the body archons, which each one is like sort of associated with the body parts or matter. So the whole body, in a sense, like we're bound to the flesh. We're limited by our own physiology,
Yeah.
with the exception of consciousness, or at least those that are spiritual believe that the
Mhm.
consciousness can go beyond the physical matter, psychic abilities, astral projection, things like that. afterlife, ghosts, that there's more than just this.
Yeah. And then next verse it says, "That is why I said to you, be of good courage. And if you are discouraged, be encouraged in the presence of the different forms of nature." I'm kind of at a loss as to what that is talking about. The different forms of nature. Be encouraged in the presence of the different forms of nature. The eons?
Well, maybe, or it could be Platonic forms. Abstract, perfect, unchanging concepts, space, time,
That would make sense.
like different aspects of nature.
Yeah, so
Although
we're
later down the text, let's see, they mention. I'm trying to think what else they mention later down in the text. They mention different forms,
mhm.
what they call the powers. So further down, there's exotia, different powers of
Let's see.
different powers which are like hindrances to the spirit itself, to the suke, the psyche, the soul. I think it's like a chapter or two down. They get into it in the Gospel of Mary.
Yeah. Well, even from the beginning, right? The first full verse that we see, the Savior said, "All nature, all formations, all creatures exist in and with one another, and they will be resolved again into their own roots." So, for all formations, okay.
When I think of, I mean, if they're talking about Platonic formations, then there's four levels of reality. You have sort of like the perception or imagining.
Mhm.
There's belief. Then there's like cognition, thoughts, thinking, and then you also have uh, what they call the perfected intelligence, the higher form of intelligence, I guess is another way to look at it. There's a debate as to what that is. The ultimate reality, high rationality. It like it could be monadic. I mean, it just depends on how one views. I mean, as one ascends through or perceives the world, they begin to see reality with more clarity through the Platonic system. And there's like an ultimate higher level of experience in reality, which would be the what they would call like the perfect intelligence, being able to perceive reality at the highest degree. And what that comes
Mhm.
down to in a Gnostic sense would be the pleroma, being able to experience the pleroma in all its entirety.
Yeah, like a God's eye view.
Yeah,
Yeah, although you never really see the monad, or I don't know. Yeah, the monad thing is a little bit confusing, but you can never go that far into it, into the pleroma.
yeah, you could only perceive to a certain point of the objective world as well as the subjective world. You could only go as deep as your own witness consciousness, and then the outside world, the objective world. There's only so so far that one could perceive the external world as well. And a lot of that has to do with our physiology. But I think as the spirit itself develops, or beyond, because in Gnosticism there's multiple planes of existence. So as one goes to the higher realms,
Mm-hmm.
their perception or understanding of existence becomes grander. The magnitude of it increases.
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
like a Buddhist getting closer to becoming a Buddha.
Yeah. I think they talk about that in the Gospel of Paul. I think it's Paul, where he goes up to each heaven, and each heaven is infinitely more amazing than the previous one.
Yeah.
And but I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's that concept. I mean, although how would you describe it? But Paul says it's not lawful to be described, which is kind of funny. You wonder if that's not, I don't know, somebody making it up. Like, oh, I just can't tell you. I'm not allowed, right? But with
Or
that,
that's
uh,
another thing with the. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut
well,
you off.
okay. So here's a verse that is kind of relates to it. Near the very end, when the soul had overcome the third power, it went upwards and saw the fourth power, which took 7 forms. So I haven't the faintest idea, but here's our 7 forms. The fourth power takes 7 forms. I wonder if we have any idea what that is talking about. The third power, and then it lists off what they are. I don't know. Are we talking about the third heaven? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts? And what were you about to get to before I mentioned that?
Oh, I was going to say the epistles of, well, the Pauline epistles. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's two main versions. You have Orthodox Paul, the Orthodox version of the epistles, which we find in the Bible, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have Marcion Paul. The Marcion epistles of Paul are different. So there could be that section where Paul specifically says that might not be in the Marcion epistles, which could mean it may have been added later, or it's just a different version, or not everything Marcion said was documented, and it was there, but it just wasn't. It just didn't make it into the the reconstruction. I mean, there's
Yeah.
several possibilities there because we don't exactly know what Marcion's Bible entirely looked like. So maybe he's even hinting on there's for some reason there's authoritarians that are saying he can't reveal that information. Maybe it's something that has to be revealed through initiation, or it's been
That's a
kept
good
in
point.
secret,
Yeah.
or it's beyond human comprehension, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The kind of mystery school thing kind of makes sense. And why would it not be lawful for you to tell, right? Because it's against the rules with
Yeah.
you have to be initiated first. I've heard something that with the Catholic Church, there used to be mysteries that they would teach, but you first had to receive baptism to learn those mysteries.
Yeah, the mysteries, the way that it was before and the way that it is now is much different because Catholicism became fundamental after the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it started to move that way from late 1700s forward, and the way that the sacraments were performed, because the sacraments are the mysteries, but the way that they were performed and the information you're taught has almost been eliminated. There's Catholic priests that want to go back to the old ways, although it's been kind of suppressed to just kind of keep the fundamentalism in place. But what's kind of funny about it is the old style of Catholicism, when you went through, it was a mystery school, basically. It emerged out of Rome, and they would initiate people into it through the sacraments. So yeah, you're baptized first, and then you go through the various steps. Each one, they would explain further about the mysteries, about I'm trying to think of one example, the Stations of the Cross, for example. There's the regular upfront open version, and then there's like an esoteric version where like it's explained in depth. Well, think about how the book of Revelation works. You have the book, if you just read it, you get the literal sense of it just from reading it, right? That there's a second coming of Christ, there's an end of the world, it's an apocalypse, right? But then if you're taught something, or you look at it metaphorically, then there's something deeper to it. I think last time I had mentioned that, the beast that rises from the ocean with 7 heads, that in the old days from like the 1300s, there's a reference that I pulled. Even the old Protestant church back then used to teach, at least, a few centuries ago, back in like the 1600s, they used to teach that was equated to the 7 deadly sins. Whereas today it's literally a monster that comes out of the ocean at the end of the world.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that as a person progressed through, they would learn more about, there would be different traditions, if that makes sense, and like they would learn like in depth what the symbolism meant.
Yeah, where I remember, like, there's several passages in the epistles that lead us to believe that there was an initiatory thing going on, similar to the mystery schools. You wonder if the Stations of the Cross weren't that, right? So you're baptized, maybe it's in a different order, you receive the Eucharist, and then the Stations of the Cross?
Well, the way that I know that the way that when I was brought in, they broke it down to 2 sections. So you receive the Stations of the Cross in 2 different sections. You'd receive it basically through the communion and the catechism. The catechism was mostly like the asking of questions, but then you also had when you received the first Eucharist.
Then there
And
was
that's
more.
another thing. When I was taught Eucharist, it was something that took, basically through the first Holy Communion, it took 2 years to get through it. It wasn't a thing like where you just jump in and you get it in a couple months. You had to, basically what happened back then is they actually taught you what you were doing, like what was going on, and how, instead of just them telling you, well, this is the body of Christ, it's literally the body, they kind of more explain like what the priest was doing, that he was summoning like the Holy Spirit, the divine essence of the Lord, and pulling it from another realm and like blessing the items with it. That the presence of God was there at the Mass, as opposed to it just being a ceremony. In Protestantism, it's just more of like, not all Protestantism. I mean, there's still more sort of mystical elements to like Methodism and traditional Lutheranism.
Yeah.
But like the more that you get into sort of the Western, modern, American forms of Protestantism, it becomes more of just like a ceremony where you dedicate yourself. It's not meant to be taken supernaturally.
Yeah, definitely. And you'd mentioned the seven-headed beast in Revelation. That's a bit like, where we have the waters symbolizing chaos, right? And coming out of chaos, we have a monster.
Yeah, yeah,
So
because he
we could,
rises from the ocean.
yeah, and we could look at that as the demiurge, right? So
Yeah,
coming out of the matter and the chaos is the demiurge, and then we have the passions.
yeah, it emerges from. Yeah, and technically it's the archons and the demiurge, right? Because the demiurge is just the coagulation of the archons, meaning the archons merge together and they become the demiurge.
Okay, I've heard it where there's Sophia, who's the last Eon,
Hmm.
and she is crafty, right? And she decides to create on her own, and she creates Yaldabaoth. Whereas, like, there's like another tradition we're saying where the archons are created, and then they kind of create this, like, kind of like a godhead.
It's still the way that you explained it. It's just that the demiurge splinters even more, if that makes sense. Like
Okay.
he's created from Sophia, but he emanates into more. He becomes more broken into individual archons, but they individually, when they're merged together, I, I guess the idea is that the person ascends through each archon, and if they're able to overcome all of the archons, then they could experience. Well, then they break the cycle technically, but you could still experience the pleroma, at least elements of it, or like reflections of it, portions of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that until one entirely breaks the cycle, they wouldn't experience reality in all its entirety, or like the fullness of the divine. Because in a sense, it's almost like if we viewed it as the two lower Platonic parts of the soul, then we can't entirely experience rationality until we're able to overcome our own carnal desires.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's more than just carnal desires and emotions, but it's almost as if there's sort of like the lower part of the mind, which prevents us from being able to sort of utilize it all as one unit. But I mean, from a more, I guess, mystical sense, if we view them as beings, the demiurge itself kind of creates like little copies of itself, which it splinters off and becomes these individual archons, each with their own power or force over humanity.
Okay, and then there's seven of them.
Well, there's different traditions. Some have seven, some have nine, and what those are change. Like the Ophites have a different tradition of what they are. Uh, each school of Gnosticism has a different opinion as to what those are. And then in the Pistis Sophia, they go even further. That there's even they describe them from a different. I mean, even though it's Valentinian, there was more than
Mm-hmm.
one Valentinian tradition. So as what basically happens with the Valentinians is that after Valentinus or Valentius, however you want to say that, after he dies, some of the school kind of splits apart a little bit, and some of the followers continue to preserve his traditions, but some of them have ideas of their own. So they begin to add to Valentinianism their own thoughts, their own opinions on as to what these Platonic ideas were or spirituality. It evolves further and further until eventually, I believe the last school that I could remember is called Marcosianism, and it gets extremely complex. which is
Yeah.
something I want to reconstruct is Marcosianism a little bit.
Mhm.
Although I'm not really ready for that. I mean, there's a lot of references within the critics of Gnosticism that talk about it, and there's still like it's still being discovered. What was he really saying? It's like we're looking in this text and we're seeking to grasp some sort of fruit or meaning or
Mhm.
succulence from it, and I would say like with Marcosianism, it gets even more complex,
Yeah.
where they get into more ideas that would be parallel to something like uh, quantum physics or something like that, or numerology. Like it gets into more complex theory as opposed to just solely being spiritual. It's almost like combining Pythagoreanism with Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism, spirituality. So it takes like science,
Mhm.
or what would be like mathematics and science, and mixes it in and together with spirituality and
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yep. All right. So,
We were on the powers, right? And we
well,
were
I mean,
talking
I
about
think
the
we're all over
seven.
the map, but yeah, powers and forms where it says, and if you are discouraged, be encouraged in the presence of the different forms of nature. So it could be referring to Platonism, different forms of nature. And
Here it says for the seven powers, the last one, it says the seventh is the wrathful wisdom. So in the Coptic, it says Sophia.
mhm,
Sophia Sophia is also in one of the systems. Sophia is also one of the archons, the last and final archon. Well, depending. One of the traditions,
mhm.
she happens to be one of the archons, meaning that there's a craving for Sophia, because a lot of them are
Mhm.
like, in a way, they're hindrances, or there's some sort of, they're almost, I don't know if I want to say sinful in nature, but they're obstacles in from one obtaining gnosis.
Got it. And that's why she's the last one.
Yeah, because there still could be like an attachment to ego, or like an attachment, like even a craving for gnosis or desire itself, which is like a block. Like when one's craving to obtain gnosis, it could even prevent them from obtaining gnosis. Much like a Buddhist craving to experience nirvana, it becomes a block for them because they're chasing after it
Mhm.
rather than just being. Does that kind of make sense? Like even
Yeah.
wisdom itself could be desirous, or it could be a prevention from going beyond that.
Yeah, where you're kind of, what do we want to say? Yeah, I mean, you can't really understand it if you're driven too hard to understand it, right? Like uh, cramming for a test is kind of getting in the way of you studying for the test a bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
Or
yeah, right?
yeah, I was going to say something like that. Like it in itself gets in the way. That Sophia in itself gets in the way. Like think about someone wanting to, if we even looked at it as divine knowledge, one wanting to have that divine knowledge, it becomes a craving to obtain the divine knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a distraction in itself. Even though it seems like it's a positive thing, it could also prevent us from obtaining it because we want it too much.
Mm-hmm.
Like it should come to us naturally. Well, that's the same thing with the Kaloskaisophos. that was something that you couldn't necessarily. It happened in a way where someone didn't just receive it like they did authority. You couldn't just take it from somebody and get it. It had to be within the philosophical circles and the sophists and many of these other groups. One had to earn it. It wasn't like a degree that you could just pay for, or even with the degree itself in school. You pretty much got to earn that. Like you got to work for it, and that's kind of what that was like. Is that you didn't necessarily declare yourself a Kalos Kaisophos. You were recognized one because everyone in the world saw you that way, or people around you. Meaning that it's almost like someone declaring themselves a guru.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be earned that way. The people around them would recognize them as a guru, and then they would become a guru, as opposed to them being a self-proclaimed guru. So it had to come naturally. And I think there's some similarities there.
Yeah, and what's that term? Is that like a Buddhist term? What was it?
Kalos Kaisophos? No, it's a Greek term.
And what is that referring to?
It just means that it refers to like a state of existence or a title which one receives in life through many experiences, meaning that all it's saying is that the person is a wise man or a wise woman, that they've gone through enough life that they could be looked up to and come to for advice because they've experienced life. So what those types of people in Greek society led the philosophical schools, they led groups like Gnosticism because they understood life, because they've experienced it and went through it. It was almost like the idea that wisdom comes through experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a title that they had to earn. It wasn't something that they could necessarily fight for, because they wouldn't be respected if they were just to oust somebody and take the chair.
Yeah.
People might fear them and might not openly say it, but underlying all of it, they're not respected. Meaning that it was a title that someone had to earn by walking the path,
Gotcha.
by the long journey.
Gotcha. All right, so here, let's keep going. So next verse, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. I mean, that's just maybe a hint that there's like a secret here, right? Like like if you know, right?
Yeah.
And
It
then
almost
yeah, go ahead.
sounds, I was going to say, it almost sounds like, it's referring to the reader too.
Mm-hmm.
In reading it, it led them to this text, or it led them to this sort of state. It led them to that condition. They heard the logos, they heard the word, and now they're here, and they've reached sort of like another plateau.
Yeah. When the Blessed One had said this, he greeted them all, saying, "Peace be with you. Receive my peace unto yourselves." I mean, I'm hard pressed to read anything profound out of that. Just saying, I don't know. I wish you all the best.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a blessing.
Yeah.
And he's blessing the person who's reading this, and he's telling them, hey, look, now you're a follower, now you're an apostle, go preach the word to the world.
Mm-hmm. Beware that no one lead you astray, saying, "Lo here," or "Lo there," for the Son of Man is within you. So the Son of Man is within you, which is interesting because what do we mean by Son of Man, right? That's a big thing in terms
Mm,
of uh, eisegesis. We're trying to interpret the text like there's a Son of God, there's a Son of Man. Who's the Son of Man, right? Is Jesus the Son of Man, or is he referring to someone else? The Son of Man is within you. The Son of Man, I don't know. It seems to be Christ that I'm with you, but then we'd presume the Blessed One, they mean Christ.
hmm
And then for the Son of Man is within you, doesn't say Blessed Man or Christ. I don't know. But I would take it that that's Christ.
Yeah.
And don't let anyone lead you astray. So basically, you've got it. Like you kind of have the divine in you, so you don't have to be blown. You can be confident in yourself.
Yeah, that you have the logos within,
Yeah. And
and
do you
that
have any take? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say then, and you follow that sort of voice within, or the logos within, pure
Mm-hmm.
thought, Christ consciousness, the Christ within, as opposed to leading astray to something else. That it's all within you to some extent, right?
Yeah. And do you have any take on specifically Son of Man, like what that might mean, and like why are we saying Son of Man instead of Son of God or Christ or something along those lines?
I know that Son of Man. There's a few ways that it's kind of viewed. One of them is that it's a title. Um, Yeshua had that title as well. Son of Man, in a broader sense, could mean humanity.
Got it.
Although I don't think
Okay.
it's, I don't feel like it's talking about humanity here.
Yeah.
But I know there's like
Well,
others. I
I
mean, I
don't
guess we
know.
could
I
look.
mean, that might be able to make sense that for humanity is within you.
Maybe.
Um, Beware that no one lead you astray, saying low here, low there, for the Son of Man is within you. I don't know. I guess.
And, and there's another technical term. When somebody reached a level, they became a son of. Well, this is more with son of God. In ancient Greece, when one became of a certain age, they received the title called son of, basically son of Theos. So what that kind of meant is that
Mm-hmm.
they had went through an initiation, they had reached an appropriate age, and they would align themselves with whatever Greek archetype that they were going to pursue. For most people, for most men, it was Apollo, but for
Mm-hmm.
others, depending on what sect of the Greeks they came from, what region, and actually, it's not just only that; it's
Mm-hmm.
individual. The individual themselves, what they are pursuing to become. So they would follow a Greek archetype that was closer to what they believed their own uh, optimistic self would be. What they would align with what would be their own nature and pursue that path. If that makes sense. So whichever god was more closely related to their skill set, or something that's similar, that could be maybe one could transform into, but not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like shape shifting, but like more of like the qualities of the qualities of the divine.
Yeah. Got it. All right. So for the Son of Man is within you. Follow him. Those who seek him will find him. So he's already in you, but you seek him, you'll find him. wonder what that's trying to say. You'll see. Follow him. So, Son of Man is within you. Follow after him. Okay, like so. Go inside yourself and find Christ inside you, and if you look, you'll find it. That's how I'd take it.
Yeah. I feel like that one is a little more straightforward, but I mean,
Mhm.
there could be something more profound there.
Yeah. And then go preach the gospel of the kingdom. I think we're pretty straightforward there too. Do not lay down any rules beyond what I appointed to you, and do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it. So I kind of think of it as do not lay any rules beyond what I appointed to you. It's like the demiurge on Mount Sinai, right? I'm a jealous God. You'll have no other gods besides me, right?
Hmm.
Which he's the lawgiver, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to lay down any rules beyond which I appointed to you. And do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it. So that's probably the most Gnostic verse we've read so far, where the demiurge on Mount Sinai giving the laws, or else the archons, right? I think in one epistle, or is it Acts, where they say the angels gave the law on Mount Sinai, not God, not Hashem. And so I think of it like you have like a ball and chain around your leg if you're following the law, right? Because you're constrained by it. You can't escape because you're constrained by the law.
Yeah, I feel you there. Like I think with this idea of sin, it's almost as if, I mean, I feel like there's also other gospels in which he kind of lays down his guidelines, at least show us
Mm-hmm.
guidelines. But I feel like here with sin, that that's almost like one of the primary laws that he's kind of referencing as well, that
Mm-hmm.
this whole idea of sin being self-created, that's something we have to pay attention to, as opposed to, like,
Mm-hmm.
because with orthodoxy it's kind of set on, there's a bunch of rules: do not do this,
Mm-hmm.
do not do that. I mean, of course there's the 10 commandments, but it's even beyond that. I mean, when you look into all of the different rules and guidelines within the Torah and within other parts of the Old Testament, there's a list of basically rules that one has to follow. Some of them are definitely great maxims that one should live by, but at the same time, they're they're often built upon by different taboos, or what one perceives to be law. A lot of them are laws of man,
Mm-hmm.
which were added to the Torah. Meaning, like the
Mm-hmm.
original Torah, it being just the first two books, and then Deuteronomy and Numbers being added later, those are like additional laws that are mostly like laws that had applied to the Israelites during that era. They weren't a part of the original Torah.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense that the Torah went from it being just some maxims and guidelines that had been expounded by Moses, to now it was this larger series of scrolls that weren't necessarily the original rules. And I think Jesus is kind of 360 and back to that, and saying, "Hey, look, that we really just have to have faith in the Father
Yeah.
and prevent sin from rising."
Yeah. And when we say father, do we mean the monad?
Yeah, sometimes sometimes I might by accident, I guess. I feel like it's almost like a misnomer, but like at times I might say the Father when I'm really speaking about, uh, at least in this sense,
Mm-hmm.
Hashem or something similar.
Well,
God, whatever usage you want, you know.
yeah. I mean, I think, at least in this context, like the lawgiver, he's not saying the father, right? So
I
I
mean,
think,
lawgivers back then um, would have been something like the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Sorry about that. Yeah, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, as well as like the Deuteronomists, those that compiled the ancient Jewish laws. So, in a sense, he may be referring to them as the lawgivers,
mhm. Yeah, it could
or
be.
like you had
So,
mentioned, maybe even the demiurge, that it
yeah,
being a sort of stratum of subconsciousness.
yeah, or it's intentionally vague, where it
Yeah,
could mean a lawgiver that you're under their law and you don't want to be under any law. You
yeah,
just want to do your own thing. You want to do right because it's right, not because it's a law.
yeah. Not because someone says it's right or wrong.
Yeah, and then you're
Yeah.
constrained by the law.
Well, and that's another thing is that yeah, lawgiver, as you mentioned, may not just be to a specific culture. I mean, even referring to Romans, ancient Roman Senate, like the laws they created, which were laws of the
Yeah.
land as opposed to a divine law. Or I wouldn't necessarily say divine law, but uh, yeah, I would say like freedom itself.
Hmm. Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And next verse, and when he said this, he departed. I mean, that's kind of straightforward, I think. It sets this up for the next chapter. Um, I don't know. Can we read into anything there? When he said it, he departed. I can't think of anything like profound out of that. Um,
I mean, when he said he departed, I mean, I think that there's a few ways to maybe look at it. Uh,
mhm.
he he died afterwards, or like if you view it from him being docetic, he kind of vanished and just sort of disappeared. You know,
Yeah. No, that's good. I
he
mean,
extinguished at some point and he moved
yeah,
on.
where you can kind of think that that's their version of the passion narrative. When he
Yeah,
said this, he departed.
yeah.
But so they're
That's
not,
kind of
yeah, they're not really too much into the passion narrative. They're like, yeah, yeah, he said it and then he was gone. You know, I mean, I think of the Gospel of Mary as being like very, what do we want to call it, hippie-ish, right? Like it's not about like, I don't know what to say. Like you're not going to see blood and gore. You're gonna see light and serenity, right? So this it might be a reference to the passion. I don't know. That's a good point. And here's chapter 5. But they were grieved they wept greatly, saying, "How shall we go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel of the kingdom of the Son of Man? If they did not spare him, how will they spare us?" Okay, so here, tying that into the Passion narrative, 100%, right? If they did not spare him, how will they spare us, right? I don't know.
Yes.
That I think that lends a great deal to that interpretation with the next verse. And they wept greatly. How shall we go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel of the kingdom of the Son of Man? If they did not spare him, how will they spare us? So it's a little different, right? So I'm imagining, this could be a reference to, they said, tell the disciples, meet me in Galilee. But then they left and told no one because they were scared. This is kind of the same thing. Like, how are we going to do that, right? They're maybe going to kill us, right? So, like the short, abrupt ending in Mark. Or what do you think?
I agree with you there.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of certainty after he departs. Yeah. And yeah, that is a really good catch. That he died, he departed, and then they were grieved and they wept greatly, saying, How, how shall we go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel of the kingdom of the Son of Man? They did not spare him, how will they spare us? Then Mary stood up, greeted them all, and said to her brethren, Do not weep, and do not grieve, or be irresolute, for his grace will be entirely with you, and will protect you.
Here's a chair.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you can at least put the computer there, or you can sit there.
Okay.
You go.
Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no worries. So with verse 2, let's see, I think this is pretty straightforward. Then Mary stood up, greeted them all, and said to her brethren, Do not weep and do not grieve or be irresolute, for his grace will be entirely with you and will protect you. Thoughts on that, or it's just pretty straightforward?
I feel it's pretty straightforward there.
Yeah, I can't think of any other way to interpret it. But rather, let us praise his greatness, for he has prepared us and made us into men. So that reminds me of the Gospel of Thomas. Right? So this is Mary Magdalene talking. He has prepared us and made us into men. Right? Us, including herself, has been made into men. Right? You know that that verse from the Gospel of Thomas? I think it's James that says, let Mary depart from us.
Yeah, in that verse in the Gospel of Thomas, yeah, it's I would say it's maybe equated to something like that. He calls it's a debate as to how it's translated, but he either calls Mary his wife or he calls her sister of the faith.
Gotcha.
In the common translation, they just say woman, but the term they use in Coptics is actually very technical, and it could either be a sister of the faith, meaning she was like a female apostle, or it could also be rendered as wife.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't the common term for wife, although it
Yeah.
could still be viewed that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean the verse where it says, let Mary depart from us, for women are not worthy of life. And Jesus said, then I will make her a man and she can be, what, exactly like you. And any woman that makes herself a man will inherit the kingdom of heaven. Something along those lines, right? So I don't know. I wonder what that could mean, like a woman being made into a man, right? He's prepared us and made us into men, and it's a woman talking.
I'm
Right?
trying to. I'm looking at something really quick.
Mm-hmm. So Simon Peter said to him, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. Jesus said, I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. Or I wonder if we see a parallel here.
Uh, well, here, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to look at something really quick and see what it
Mm-hmm.
says in Coptic. If
Sure.
there's maybe a different rendering of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it pretty much says the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, prepared us to be male or prepared us to be human.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it could be rendered either as human or man. I mean, well, how would it read if it says human as a as opposed
Prepared
to?
us and made us into humans. I don't know. I couldn't really make any sense of that because, like, they were already human. So, I mean, if you can look at any metaphor being made by something being made into itself, which, I mean, we have the parallel also in Thomas, where if salt loses its savor, or is that in one of the canonical? I think it's in a canonical gospel too. If salt loses its flavor, it's worthless and will be trampled upon. Where salt can't lose its savor, like salt is always salty because that's what salt is. It's salt and it's salty. So what are we talking about? If salt loses its saltiness, it's like if it loses its essential quality that makes it that thing, then it's worthless. But how do you lose your essential quality? That it's saying like losing the gnosis, right?
You know what this term also could be rendered as? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead
Mhm.
and finish what you were going to say.
Well, so it's kind of, if we were to interpret men here as human, it's a thing being identical to itself or being transformed into itself, how it was before. That it's like something that's made different from itself, then it's worthless. But if you're transformed into yourself. And there's also, what is it about in the Apocryphon of John? Blessed is the man who eats the bear, because he will turn into a bear. Isn't that how it goes? A lion. Blessed is the man who eats the lion, for he will turn into a lion. But woe to the bear that eats the human, because he will turn into a lion.
Hmm.
So I take that as, like, in that version, I take it the lion, because like we have the lion-headed serpent, right, as the demiurge.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
whoever like slays the demiurge and consumes it, well, that's good, because now you're the lion, right? You're powerful now. But if you're eaten by the lion, then you're transformed into the lion, right? And you're captive to the world, right? So like either way, you're the lion, but it depends on who eats who, right?
Yeah, but is it a
Yeah.
good thing that the bear eats the lion though? Because
Oh, not the bear, the human.
whether oh yeah,
I messed up. I
yeah,
thought I was thinking bear, but it's lion. It's human and bear. See, I did it again. Human and
human and lion.
lion.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I, but is it necessarily a good thing that the human eats the lion? It's almost like the lion distracts him to eat it, so he becomes the lion. He
Yeah.
becomes the demiurge, like he's lured into doing what the demiurge does, so he becomes the demiurge
Well,
either way. It may not necessarily be a good thing to become the lion.
I think it's like, well, that's so great. Like, blessed is he who eats the lion, because he'll be made into a lion. Whereas it's like you have all, like, you're the demiurge, like you're the powerful one here, but you're not the demiurge, but you essentially are, like you've overcome him,
Hmm.
right? I mean, is how I take that. But
Yeah, I
look,
feel that's kind of how I feel from the. That's probably the most, I would say, most logical way of explaining it.
yeah, but for he has prepared us and made us into men.
Oh yeah,
I don't know.
I was gonna say the same term in Coptic, Romi. Apparently, it also means servant. He has prepared us and made us into servants.
I mean, that could kind of work. I mean, I would think it's a little bit antithetical to Gnosticism, is because you don't want to be a servant, you want to be
Hmm.
empowered. Um, One thing I'm reminded of is that in some Gnostic thoughts, all spirits are female, and only the unknowable monad is a man. So, which kind of, you want to think like, okay, so we're all female, and that's all we can know is being female. Then what the heck is a man then, right? If the monad is a man and it's unknowable, like, what do you like? Then the word man has no meaning, right? We don't know what that is, right? So I wonder if it might be a play on that, like made us in the likeness of the monad.
Hmm. Or like even with Thomas, it kind of suggests that the soul itself is genderless, neither male nor
Mhm.
female, or even maybe even both. But then when you look at something like Jungian psychology, one taps into their opposite. So like a male's going to get in touch with their anima, but then a female would interact with their animus. Therefore, once they interact with that, they become balanced. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, except here, I mean, in all instances, it's being made into men or a man, right? And so it's like, I don't see like it being androgynous here or like an allusion to it.
Hmm.
I don't know.
But I mean, like connecting with your other side. Like
Yeah.
if one is born masculine, then there's like, because back then they, or even not even too long ago, there was what you would call like gender roles. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like the belief that women have certain qualities or behavioral sets, and that they have a certain area of focus, and then men, they're masculine. But
Hmm.
the belief that there's like a feminine side to a man, or a creative side, or something
Hmm.
like that, where there's also the opposite for a woman. There's that other side as well, a more masculine, or however you would put it. You know what I mean? Like there's that animus for them.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then we have, well, here also, to those that are viewing this later, if you have a solution to or a possible answer to the phrase prepared us and made us into men, specifically like in relation to that verse in Thomas, I don't know, maybe comment here. And because, yeah, I'm curious on how else to take that. So, all right, then we have when Mary said this, she turned their hearts to the good. Oh, and here up above we referenced the good previously. I think we did, didn't we? I think Christ is the good, right? Which corresponds to, is it the Socratic good or is that Platonic? But there's the good, which is like maybe like the ideal thing, right? Essentially God. Is that how you would take that?
Yeah, I would agree with you there.
Yeah. Then when Mary said this, she turned their hearts to the good, and they began to discuss the words of the Savior. Can you think of any double meaning there? I think it's pretty straightforward. Outside of the good, which I think refers to Jesus. Yeah, I'd say straightforward. Discuss the words of. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any other thing. Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than the rest of women."
I'm trying to think if, because um the way that, because remember I had talked about Kalos Kaiagathos, good here is agathos, which is more it's necessarily good, but it's more like perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Like a I guess you would say like an ideal state or a perfect existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which kind of makes us think about the Platonic concept.
Perfection of the soul.
The what?
Perfection of the soul, like a removal of all afflictions and temptations, if that makes sense. Like he's almost like Christ is almost saying like he's complete.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
When Mary said this, she turned their hearts to the good, and they began to discuss the words of the Savior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than the rest of women." So for that, I don't know. That does seem a little bit odd that it would seems like it would contain something, but I don't really know what to think of that.
I guess I keep getting drawn back to agathos
Mm-hmm.
because there's kind of more to it. A lot of it has to do with like one's ethical behavior, morality, like because she kind of says she turned their hearts to the good. So like
Mm-hmm.
the one's compassion, like in Greek culture, one's compassion is derived from their internal agathos.
Mm-hmm.
Their sort of compassion to be moral, or their compassion to be a good person, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more than just a lot of it has to do with like your actions and your deeds. It's how you carry yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that, like she turns the heart towards one sort of inner drive to being the perfect Greek, or inner drive to being like this
Mm-hmm.
ethical person. And when they kind of look inside and they sort of see that there is this sort of perfect existence, then they begin to think about the logos and the words of the Savior.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I it's just something I had my mind stuck on that, and I kind of felt like maybe there was a little more to it.
Yeah. Yep. No, for sure. And then with this one, Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than the rest of women." Reminds me of the disciple that Jesus loved in John, where we don't really know who that is. And this here could be a reference to, well, that's Mary Magdalene,
Yeah.
right? And so maybe it's like just tying up a loose end and saying, yeah, that's actually her.
Hmm.
Tell us the words of the Savior, which you remember, which you know, but we do not, nor have we heard them. So she has secret knowledge that's
Hmm.
just for her. And so she's going to say it. Mary answered and said, "What is hidden from you, I will proclaim to you." And she began to speak to them these words. She said, "I saw the Lord in a vision, and I said to him, 'Lord, I saw you today in a vision. He answered and said to me, Blessed are you that you do not waver in the sight of me, for where the mind is, there is treasure. So that's kind of interesting. In the vision, she tells him, Lord, I saw you in a vision today. It's kind of weird. Like, what does that even mean? Like we're in vision inception or something? I don't know.
I mean, I kind of just see it as like in a vision. I just kind of see it as like a revelation. Maybe she had some sort of profound experience, a trance or something she went into.
Mm-hmm.
Although
Well,
this,
well,
go ahead.
in the vision, she's referencing a vision that she saw of him, which is kind of weird, right?
Yeah. Well, in Docetism, it's the grace. The oh, it's the spiritual body.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe she might be saying she had a revelation, and within that revelation, she saw a docetic Christ, not necessarily a physical one,
Mm-hmm.
but like what he appeared as in the vision itself, in the revelation itself,
Yeah.
an incorporeal form of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah.
This other section where it says, "For where the mind
Mm-hmm.
is, there is the treasure."
Yeah.
For where the mind is, there is the treasure. Now, the treasure in Coptic could be aho or ahi, iho, peho. There's a few ways of sort of rendering it.
Yeah.
Peho in Greek means convexity, but it also means necklace. It literally means like the curvature of something or the roundness. Its most literal meaning is the roundness of the forehead, meaning like the front of the forehead, like the curvature of that, the roundness of the forehead.
Mm-hmm.
In Aho comes from the Egyptian. Now with these two words, like treasure, with Aho or Ahi in the Egyptian, it means storehouse, and here we're looking at like the storehouse of the soul. So the treasure of the soul is like it's the storehouse of the soul,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. And it could almost read something similar to, let me see the passage again. For where the mind is, there is the storehouse of the soul. So it could be saying something like the mind is within the soul, or like the psyche is within this sort of divine spark. Where you
Yeah.
find the mind, you will also find the soul,
I think so.
meaning that the mind is like interconnected in some way with the consciousness.
Yeah. Or if treasure here can be interpreted as like something to be sought for, right? There's something to be sought for in the mind, and maybe that's the spirit.
The spirit or the pleroma or something like that. That it's
Yeah.
they're alluding to it.
Well, yeah, kind of like with the Son of Man is within you, right? There's the treasure inside your mind, right? There's something to be sought for, or there's like the storehouse. You wonder, or So, yeah, and then it's so this bit is preceded by "Blessed are you that did not waver in the sight of me, for where the mind is, there is treasure." So I kind of think waver in the sight of Christ, almost like, I don't know, like people that would be fearful of Christ would be too afraid to get to the treasure.
Yeah, fearful or in disbelief or reject, or there's some
Yeah.
sort of like they would waver in some way. I know in Catholicism, what they define as grace
Hmm.
is an unwavering devotion to an unwavering devotion to God. So if
Hmm.
the more that one becomes unwavering, the more they're filled with grace. So here, like in Gnosticism, maybe, or like in this text, maybe they're kind of hinting on something similar. Like you said, they would be in fear if they were against this entity in some way, or the understanding of it, or the consciousness of it. In some way, they would waver. Like there would be reasons
Yeah.
why they would waver, as opposed to she has complete faith, or she's not in any sort of fear. She's confident enough to where she's not going to go away, that she could remain, she could bear the sight. That sort, I don't know if you want to call it single pointedness, or just be
Hmm.
able to uh, bear the appearance of the Lord in this case. And maybe that's where the second part of it comes, the second sentence. She's able to maybe seek the treasure, or maybe even know the treasure at that point.
Hmm. Yeah, and from the other way of viewing it, like, so the somebody who did waver at the sight of Christ, where Jesus or Christ is like guarding the treasure, right? So there's maybe like a Gnostic element that, just as like the archons are guarding, a certain, let's say, what, blocking you from ascending, right?
Hmm.
That he's almost like in the image of somebody guarding the treasure.
Which would be the serpent, Ophis, guarding the cosmic egg.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that,
It would
but
be like the pleroma being um, obscured by the demiurge, that there's something in the way which
yeah,
prevents the experience of it.
yeah, or yeah,
I guess there's many ways to maybe look at that. That's
yeah,
interesting that you bring that point up.
yeah, or like maybe good job for not being afraid, because now you'll be able to find what you're looking for, and maybe that might be an allusion towards not being afraid of the archons.
Hmm.
um, and we have, I said to him, Lord, how does he who sees the vision see it, through the soul or through the spirit? Jeez. Well, I'm told that, let's see. So I looked at I think this appears in a few other Gnostic texts: soul versus spirit.
Hmm.
Spirit is who you are, soul is your identity. right? So
You could probably
soul,
maybe view it that way. Yeah.
yeah, or
The
how do you
cop.
take it?
Well, go ahead. You could say what you're going to say first.
Oh, so I mean, soul is perishable, but spirit is forever.
In the Coptic for soul, they use suke, psyche, and then they use the word paya for spirit, which is related to the word piety. Well, it's related to the English word piety. So for
Okay.
spirit, they're using like more of like something like zeal or like an internal kind of compassion, that sort of spirit, whereas the psyche being consciousness or what we would view as like the eternal soul. Where Paya, the spirit being more of something that's emotional, I guess you could say, and then the psyche being you could say maybe something related to the mind or the actual consciousness or the soul itself. If that makes sense.
Well, so you saying the soul is like the core?
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
but the divine spark, I mean, it depends because I feel like the divine spark is almost like it is the soul, but it's what would be, I guess, driven by it, like almost like the will. But the will is also in the pleroma. I feel like the
Mhm.
divine spark is part of, it's associated with sort of the will and life, if that makes sense. And then, like I said, the psyche being more of like the everlasting soul, something like consciousness.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I feel like they're kind of tied together, the divine spark and the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like because of the way that they present it here, using the word paya in Coptic, that it's referring to more of like an emotional type of quality, because that's where we get the word piety from. So, I mean, it could go either way depending on how someone wants to interpret that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's a matter of interpretation, semantics probably.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I kind of see it is the psyche being more of the eternal soul, um, the soul consciousness, whereas the paya is something more of like an emotional type of soul, zeal, that kind of spirit. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like when you say something like, you know, he boosted his spirits or something, like it's more has to do with like one's emotion, one's compassion towards other people.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that the writer here assumes that the reader has a clear understanding of the difference between soul and spirit
Hmm.
so that the question will make any sense. But I think for the most part, we kind of look at the two as interchangeable.
Yeah, at least in modern dialect.
Yeah. So the Savior answered and said, He does not see through the soul nor through the spirit, but the mind that is between the two, that is what sees the vision. And it is, and the next part is lost. So
Right.
the mind sees the vision. So it's kind of like soul is the left eye, spirit is the right eye, and the binocular vision is the mind.
Hmm. So Yeah. But the mind, so yeah, they're saying the noose that is
Mhm.
between the two is what sees the vision. And it is, that's a good question. What is it?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, we,
what
we
would it?
know we know in the Coptic that it's, let's see if there's anything that might suggest what it is. Here it just says, and that it is that. It just has the letter P.
The mind is, but the mind that is between the two, that is what sees the vision. And yeah, what, fill in the blank.
Give me just 1 second.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe it could be saying something along the lines of it being either like the gnosis or pleroma, that's what the mind sees, or maybe experiences.
Yeah. I'd want to think that if we look through the reference between, if we look through other Gnostic texts and we look at vision,
Hmm.
that something would pop out and we could complete that sentence. And the vision
Yeah,
is something, because this almost, it seems like a metaphor that would, like a catchy metaphor, right?
maybe the vision is grace. The vision is like maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
some sort of quality that one is supposed to realize.
Yeah.
I feel like it's probably gnosis, like maybe it's something that obvious, but
Yeah. Or how does he who sees the vision see it? Um, yeah, we might have some veiled reference to gnosis. You know that it's saying gnosis without saying it.
yeah.
I have a feeling that that might be what we're seeing, or what we would see. Um, all right, and that's the end of chapter 7. Whoa, wait, chapter 5.
Hmm.
So chapter 6 and 7, we don't have it.
Yeah, and here it just kind of jumps into
Yeah,
the forms. I was gonna say I have maybe a couple minutes left. Maybe we could go a little bit into the forms.
yeah. Oh, you have to get going.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, if you want to get into that, and we can wrap up here, or we can make this part 1.
Okay, and then maybe we'll just finish the next two sections for part
Yep.
2.
That sounds good. Do you have any final thoughts you wanted to say before you get rolling?
I think that's all I have for now.
All right. Sounds great. All right. Thanks so much. And yeah, we'll see you next
I'll
time.
see you next time. Have a
Yep.
good night.
Yep.
Bye.
All right.